everybody, this is Julia Laird with Senior Susie Stamps, and today we're looking at white paper scraps and some ideas of how to use them. Before we start, I want to tell you a little bit about how I store my white paper scraps, because I've said before and I'll say it again, I think the way you store scraps stimulates you to use scraps, especially if you commit to using your scraps first. So I have two trays that sit right up here on my desk. They're there all the time, and this one is marked for small white paper scraps, and that's what I put all of these little piles in. There's 1/4 inch more or less, 1/2 inch more or less, and then approximately 1 inch more or less in varying lengths. So that goes in here, and I keep it right up here so I can pull it and use it for anything I want to. And then I have this tray, which is for large white paper scraps, and you'll see I have some fairly decent sized white paper scraps in there. I'm not using those today. What I want to do is to get through some, not all, some of these piles today. But this is all the white paper scrap that I have since I did the last video, and that was 5 months ago. So I wanted to encourage you all that have these big piles of white paper scraps to think about that a little bit, because I make a lot of cards, and this is it. I've got the 1/4 inch, the 1/2 inch, 1 inch, and the weirds. So let's go through them pile by pile, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with these today. Let me move this out of the way because I've got this one ready to work on. And what I want to do today is to colorize these 1/4 inch strips. And because you can do a lot with a 1/4 inch strip. Now this happens to be yellow paper, but it could have just as easily started as a white scrap and been colorized to yellow. So that makes those very useful. But what I want to do today is to colorize these. I'm going to get my little dollar store cutting mat out so that I can protect this work surface just a little bit. And then I'm going to choose however many of these little strips, and all I did was to lay them out and put a piece of clear tape over the top of them. And I know I won't be able to ink right up next to there, and that's fine. This will give me plenty of little strips to use for what I want to do. So I think I'm going to do half of them. I have kind of in my mind doing some lattice. And so I want these to look a little like wood, and you've seen me do the wood drag before, and that's all I'm going to do with these. I'm just going to turn them into wood strips, and you have to be a little careful and not get too much ink on them. Just get enough. And that's brown and black. And I use these for signpost, but in this case I want to do just a little bit of a lattice weave for a backdrop on a card. So that's that page. And then on these I want to do some colored inks. And you can do that one of two ways. You can use your colored alcohol markers, or you can use your ink pads. I thought it might be fun to use ink pads because I've got an example where I used my markers before. And I'm just going to do 2 of each one. And I'm going to drag this on where it's fairly well saturated, but it doesn't have to be complete coverage. That's not what I'm looking for in this instance. Now, in order to get to these next ones, all I'm going to do is to bend my paper back. And before I do that, I'm going to take a baby wipe and wipe that ink off just a little bit. Not enough to saturate it, but I'm going to turn my page down just a little bit more and do 2 more strips. So those of you that are always reaching for your colored cardstock, but you've got a bunch of white cardstock, remember this, because it's an easy way to use some of your white paper scraps. And as I said, I don't care if it's complete coverage. That's not important to me at this point. I'm just going to wipe my surface down a little bit. But there we go. So I've got wooden and nice spring colors, and I'll be using those in some cards later on this week. But let me show you a card that has used some of this type of things. It's an Easter card. And here we are. These happen to be 1/2-inch strips, and these are some Love from Lizzie peel-offs. It would have been just as easy to cut a piece of Mira cardstock and glue on there. I've punched some little hearts and put some little gems on, made some flowers, done a white piece of paper for a bow, did a greeting, and did a little inside treatment. And I believe on this card, if I'm not mistaken, I used 9 paper scraps on that card. And so that uses up quite a nice little amount of white 1/2-inch cardstock. So there's first card. Let's move up to the 1/2-inch papers. And I'm going to save these long ones for my drawer stock, because the last time, I kid you not, the last time I did one of these scrap card, white paper scrap card things, I used up all of my white paper scraps, and then I didn't have any, so I had to cut some, which is just crazy to even think about. So I'm going to put a few of these back in here. And these are a little wider strips, so I'm going to pull them out because I have a punch that likes just a little bit wider than a 1/2-inch, but does not need the whole inch. And what I'm going to do is put them on my MISTI with a background stamp. And this stamp is Wild Heart from Stampin' Up, and it's just an overall background stamp. And I'm going to put some of that same green on, mint macaroon. Well, let me get my little papers put down here first. Let me see on the little weird pile if I've got any more. Here we go. I've got a few more little pieces here that I can use just for little stuff and such. The weird pile gets kind of interesting, doesn't it? Now, I'm just going to take this green, and I put it on my MISTI so that I can stamp it 2 or 3 times if I need to. Let's move that over just a little touch. There we go. And I'll get my speedball bearing out to use a little pressure on it. Let's see how that did. Looks like we need a little bit more, huh? This is a speedball bearing. I haven't mentioned it in quite a while, but I got it from Amazon, and they use it for, I think, silk screening, if I'm not mistaken. But it has a nice little Teflon mesh on this side, which makes it really easy to roll around on MISTI. Let's see if that works now. Yeah, that's good enough for you to see what I'm going to do here, and then I'll go back and I'll flip these over and do the other side. But I have this punch that I got recently, and it's a little leaf punch. So all I'm going to do is to flip these over and make some leaves. And I'm not going to pay any attention to the pattern at all, because I just want an all over design for some leaves for some Easter cards that I'm going to be making. And I'm going to make them out of white paper scrap and use what I've got. So there we go. I don't think you can ever have enough leaves on hand. And with a little tiny pattern like that, with hearts and little leaves on it, it coordinates with anything you put in there. So, now, on these that are a little short, I'm just going to reach over here to this pile and get a little pusher stick. I'm going to put just a little tiny touch of ATG on the edge there, and just use that for a little pusher to get up in here. Let's see, I think we can do 2. I have a lot of little small containers in the studio. I'll put this one back and flip it over and do that at a later date. Let's keep moving on. But I have all kinds of these little containers in the studio, and I'm just going to put these little leaves in there just as a holding spot for me. And that way they're right there. I know what they are. I'm going to put them with my Easter card making supplies, which I'm going to work on next week. And we'll use this one in just a second. Now, on these strips here, I have pulled several stamps out to use. And some of them are nice little thin stamps for sentiments. I'm going to use my VersaFine Onyx Black and just stamp some sentiments. Just quick and easy. And if they don't come out perfect, I'm not going to worry about it. But I am going to try, I said that and then I didn't do it. I am going to try to put them in the middle of these little strips, because all I'm doing today is building some inventory for my Easter cards. You see? It won't take but just a few minutes. And if you put them in the middle of the strip, then you have options. And that, we like options, don't we? I know I do. Let me show you a card that has Easter blessings on it. Here we go. Now this card started with an egg-shaped white piece of paper. I did a little bit of stamping on it. This is one of the white strips that I colorized. Here's my little Easter blessings sentiment. This was white that I colorized, a flower, the little wonky bird, some grass, and the inside treatment as well. I think there were probably 9 strips there that I used. So I'm going to go ahead and do maybe 20. Our first batch of Easter cards need to be to the nursing home by the middle of March, and so Peggy and I are going to start putting together some Easter cards in a week or so, and so I thought I would go ahead and get everything all ready so that when she comes for a play date we can do some card assembly easily. And I'll go ahead and get these done, but I just wanted to kind of give you the basic concept here. And I'll show you at the end what all the sentiments are. But before we move on to the next step of the weird pile, I want to show you how I keep my sentiment strips. So hang on just a second. I got a notebook and some baseball card holders. These are 9 squares. And so I have all of my sentiments in here that I have pre-stamped, and I probably won't put the Easter ones in here, but if I do the get well soons, you see I've got a few little empty spots in my get well soon. I got 3 of them there, and this one only has 1, so I really need a few more get well soon sentiments in there. And I periodically go through here and throw things out that I am no longer interested in using and replace them with other things. And that's helpful. And that's how I keep my sentiments in my 9 pockets. And it's very, very helpful when you're in the middle of making a card to go over here and pull a little sentiment strip if you're making a card that needs a strip on it. Now, what else can we do with these little 1/2-inch strips? Because they can be problematic, can't they? Now, let's look at some other ways to use these up. If you all don't have a little tiny flower punch like this, hunt one up. It's important to have on hand. And on this little set here, there's this teeny-nicey little stamp there, and on this set there's a teeny-nicey little stamp right there, and that's what I'm going to pull. And we're going to use those because they make delightful little flowers, and they use up some of your white paper scraps, and they're much better than just a plain white little flower with nothing on it at all. So let's see what we got here. And I believe I'm going to do some in purple, and I put them in the corners so that I can just go in on the corner, because when you've got a teeny-nicey little stamp like this, it's easy to get ink on your stamp block. And let's face it, it's easier to clean a smaller spot on your stamp block than a larger one. Let's see here now how that looks. So there we have a nice little flower. It could very well be a pansy, and we're going to put a little tiny gem right there in the center of that before it's all finished. So I'm going to do several, and I like to do about 5 of each one. That leaves me 3 for the outside and 2 for the inside. There we go. And then we're just going to punch them all out. And see how pretty those little flowers are, and it's all because of that stamp. You don't have to have a matching stamp to your punches and cutting dies. You just don't have to. It's not important. What you have to do is use your imagination and figure out things that work well together. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and punch out 5 more in white. And now, that's 2 pieces of scrap gone. I'm going to punch out some small circles with just a regular hole punch. And I'll need 5 of them to finish these little flowers up. No, I said that wrong. I need 10 of them to finish these little flowers up. Let me get my glue, and today I am using my art glitter glue because I want these to grip pretty quickly. I'm going to put these in an offset pattern. There we go. And then I'm going to flip them over. And remember, we're using paper scraps, so let's use them. Let's think about ways to use stuff. And here's a great way to do it. Give yourself just a little bit of lift by using some of your white paper scraps. I'm going to put 2 of these little circles on there, and that'll give it a nice lift. I'm going to show you an example here in just a second of exactly what I'm talking about. And when you're layering flowers, it's always helpful to have some that have just a little bit of lift on them. And these are nice to use on the inside of your cards because they will stand off the page, but they won't stick up like a piece of foam would and warp your card. And it didn't take but half a little second here to do them. It really doesn't take any time at all to make these. Now we're going to flip them back over and put our little purple gems on the inside there. And today I'm using a 2mm gem. These are Anita's gem wheels, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's the right term for them. You've seen me use these before. I love these things in the 2mm and the 3mm. So all I'm going to do is put a little drop of glue, and you can see now why I wanted to use my art glitter glue, because I want these little things to grab and hold so that I can get them put away and get them off my desk and move on to something else. There. Now, see how sweet these are? 5 of them. So I'm going to put my little gems back, And I'm going to add those to my little flower container here. And before we move on to something else, I want to show you what I mean about the lift. I'm hoping you'll be able to see, but you see right here, this one is lifted up. Well, I put 3 of those little discs underneath that one, and I glued this one down flat, and I put 2 up underneath that one. And then this one has one. This one I think has 2 under it as well. So these sweet little flowers, they give you just a little bit of dimension, but not enough to be a piece of foam tape. And this one is just enough to set off the side of that page and be really, really pretty there. So there you go. I have some more here that I have already punched out. And let's talk about these little flowers. This is a single layer flower. I use this Stampin' Up! Punch. I use this stamp, but it does not go with the punch at all whatsoever, but look how cute it is. And then I did some punching with this 1/2" circle on these. I did 2 layers there on that. The other thing that you can do with this type of thing is to punch some. That's not big enough. Let's get over here in the weird pile. Now, you can punch some additional white flowers to go against your back, just like this, and glue them up. And add your dimension between the layers instead of underneath the layers. Yeah. Twist it on me, hang on. There. And then you can see where the dimension falls in there between the first layer and the white backdrop. This is important for not only flowers, but also on sentiments. You can take a little piece, and let's do a little sentiment right here. Let's just say, for example's sake, that this is the size that I wanted that strip to be. Well, my point being that is, if you take another strip of white paper scrap and trim it down just a little bit smaller, like a 1/16 of an inch smaller, doesn't have to be much, just a little bit, right like that, and glue that right flat down to it, you will be surprised at how much dimension your sentiment gets. And if you do 2 layers, it really, really helps your sentiment pop off the page. And it doesn't need to be expensive foam tape to do that. You can do this with your white paper scraps just as well. Let's do another one. But you need to cut your sentiment strip in the length that you want first before you put your lift layers on. There. So instead of using 1 paper scrap, we've essentially used 3 now. And when you put this on a card, let's just put it on this card blank, you can see it sets up and has a shadow, and it's just a number that's just glued flat down, and it does show up much better. It's just like this little piece right here shows up a lot better than one would if it were flat. That one's got a couple of lifts on it. Okay, let's keep moving on. Let's look at little small die cuts, because while you can't do them with these 1/2" strips, you can do that with your weird pile. And I do not only flowers and bows, I also do butterflies and leaves. And in this season, I've been doing some little rabbits. Are they cute or what? So now what I did with these was I had a piece of paper that was about yay big, And I'd stamp my stamp. This was a single stamp, and it's from a Canadian company. I don't know. I tried to pull this off earlier and wasn't very successful. It's a magenta stamp from Canada. Hi, Canadian folks. I have several of you. But is that cute or what? And so then I put it on my scan and cut it. Or you can fussy cut it. Either way, it doesn't make any difference. If you've got a scan and cut, use it. If you don't, fussy cut it. But any little stamp like that makes a wonderful use of your weird scraps. Let's see. Here's another one. And I'm not going to cut this one right now because I don't know where I'm going to put that. But here are some more examples of what I'm talking about. Here we go. Now these are a stamp set called From Cornish Heritage Farms. It's one I bought used. Evidently Rosemary owned it first, but it's a very cute set and I thought it was adorable. And I will put these, I'm not going to fussy cut them, I'm not going to do anything else but stamp them and use my white paper scraps. And I'm going to put those right in here and hold them that way because I know I'm going to get into this stamp set. I've already pulled it to use this year and you will see cards with this later on. So I have all these little small bows. I've got some bird punches, I've got leaf punches, I have flowers, and those are all the kind of things that I will use these little, what I call the weird pile. And on some of these, I want to pull up a stamp, this leaf stamp right here, and use it to stamp some leaves and punch. As long as the stamp will fit, I know the punch will fit. And sometimes you just have to stand in your studio and do some stamping and punching and use up these little piddly pieces of scrap because they cost you just as much. That's not quite big enough. They cost you just as much per inch as your whole sheet does. So there's no point to throwing these little guys out because they're useful. You just have to use them. And you wouldn't really even have to punch them at this point. If you were on a roll and you didn't want to stop, don't do it. You're all right. Just put them in your little holding file like this. You know where your punches are. You can go grab your punch anytime and do this when you're ready to use them. I just find that it's easier to go ahead and punch them and get them ready to use so that I don't have to stop when I'm on a roll making a card and I'm looking for a little leaf to use. We're on to this piece of weird paper. And I have a big stamp, and it's this one from Unity. It's this little sweet little bunny. And I know that he's not going to stamp completely. I just don't have enough real estate to get him to stamp. Well, maybe I do. Let's just see. Okay, here we go. I'm going to stamp him in, I think I'll do him in brown because I can. This is a rich cocoa ink, and you can use your alcohol markers with it just as well as you can the black. There we go. That's fine. I'm going to cut his feet anyway. That's the plan, and the reason is because I'm going to put him in this little egg and make an Easter card with him in the egg, just right like that. So that's what this little guy is going to do. And so I'll either fussy cut him or I'll get my little brown marker and finish that line and put him on my scan and cut and let scan and cut him. Now these, let's talk about that, were some white paper scraps, and the egg shape itself is on the scan and cut, but you could just as easily cut a pattern out of a piece of paper and fussy cut, or there are plenty of egg-shaped dies. The way I got this little broken egg edge is this scissor right here, and it worked great, didn't it? Okay, so that's what we're going to use some of those stripes for that we did at the very beginning, and I'm going to set him up on a piece of lattice. That's why I made him brown, and so that's what that card's going to look like. I'm going to put him with them over there. So now let's see what we have. Okay, continuing on with the Easter theme, I thought some of these are dazzles. They come from paperwishes.com, and this is a holographic paper, so there is a lot of shine in those. And I was looking at them and I thought, ooh, Wouldn't those be pretty as little jewels for my Easter eggs? And this little punch is too big for some of them. It's a 1/2 inch. I've got a 3/8 inch punch. Let me go get it. So the 3/8 inch punch really looks nice with those little tiny ones. And there it is. And so when we're putting our little Easter eggs together, I think these are going to be some little embellishments to go on some of those colored stripes. These also do very well on Christmas ornaments. And I want to have a couple of different size punches here. And I just want them to all kind of look a little different. And this one's going to go to the 1/2 inch then. You could use these for snowflakes also, I think. There. But there's 2 strips of paper gone. And I'm going to put those in with my little flowers and rabbits. And I'll do some more of those because I'll need a bunch of them. I'll probably use about, I'm going to say probably half of this sheet here so that we can have some nice little things to go on our Easter eggs. But wouldn't that be a pretty little flower center as well? There, see how pretty that is? I like it. I might actually do those. You never know about me, do you? Okay. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do a few more sentiments and get those done. And then I'll come back at the end and show you what I've gotten done and how much of this I actually have left. But that's my ideas for today for making Easter cards out of white paper scraps. I forgot about this stack of 1-inch paper, but those are the ones that I'll be using for the wider sentiments. And you'll see some of those at the end as well. Okay, so I'll be back. So these are all the small objects that I got finished. These are the sentiments, and those white strips I will go ahead and finish today. This is the little leftover lattice and egg embellishments. This is all the white paper scraps I have left in the studio. And here are some cards. I hope you enjoyed them today and that you'll come back again and visit real soon.